On the day the earthquake hit, my husband ditched me and flew out to another city chasing his crush. I ended up buried under the debris, managing to send him a message. Peter, there's an earthquake happening. I'm stuck underground. It's so dark. I'm freaking out. Once they got me out, I fired off 2 more texts before tossing my phone into the rubble. Peter, I can't keep holding on. Good thing you're busy with work. Otherwise, you and our kid would have died here with me. It's awesome you're safe. I did this on purpose. I wanted you to think I was dead. I wanted you to suffer day and night for me and our unborn child. I wanted him to cry tears of regret, wishing he had acted differently. When the time was right and I couldn't hide it anymore, I planned to walk up to him and say, I want a divorce. It was our 2nd wedding anniversary when Peter's crush came back from abroad. I was the one who went to pick her up with him. I watched as the girl with long black hair, wearing a white dress and having a slim figure, tearfully threw herself into his arms like a bird returning to its nest. Peter, I finally see you again. And then Peter's body stiffened for a second before he reached out and gently touched her head. There, everything's fine. I stood beside them, feeling like an extra mistress. After a moment's hesitation, I grabbed Peter's hand, forcing a smile. All right, now that she's here, let's go. It was only then that she seemed to notice me for the first time, leaving Peter's embrace. She was smiling, but there was a hint of surprise and unease on her face. Peter, you're married, she whispered. The 3 of us then awkwardly headed back home. Lily was Peter's crush and also his half-sister. I'd always known Peter had feelings for her, but I only found out after we married. Peter's family situation was kinda complicated. He was an orphan. His real parents died in a car crash when he was 9. After that, a friend of his dad, who happened to be Lily's father, adopted him. So, the story of Peter and Lily finally made sense. Peter had been a lonely kid, quiet and introverted, keeping his distance because of his past. Lily, on the flip side, lived a life of luxury and happiness, innocent and carefree, slowly warming Peter up and bringing warmth into our home. Of course, Peter never talked about his relationship with Lily to me. But when I brought Lily into our home, where Peter and I had lived for 3 years, and saw her curiously looking around and touching things, I knew my suspicions were probably right. At night, while I was cooking, Peter brought back some beef and onions, asking me to make a steak. He said, Lily loves steak. I looked down and stayed silent for a bit. Peter wasn't the most attentive guy. We'd known each other for 8 years, with me chasing him for 5 and living together for 3, but he'd still forget my preferences sometimes. He even forgot that I was allergic to onions, but he remembered Lily's favorites like they were the most important thing. Even though she had been abroad for 6 years, I bit my lip and asked, Peter, did you forget? I'm allergic to onions. I get rashes all over if I touch them. He seemed dazed for a moment, then smiled and pushed me out of the kitchen. Sorry, Emma. Didn't know about your onion allergy? We never have onions on our dining table. Could you wait outside for a bit? I'll handle dinner tonight. Actually, Peter and I had eaten onions once before, 3 years ago when I first won him over. That day was pure joy, and during lunch he ordered a curry dish, and I ate some without realizing. It was also the day he took me to the hospital, but that was ages ago. He probably forgot. I nodded quietly without saying anything. Lily was still in the living room, and I didn't want things to get too tense. During dinner, maybe because of the earlier incident, Peter kept serving me dishes. The shrimp today is pretty good. I ate slowly, and when I looked up, I saw Lily passing me a shrimp. She glanced at Peter, then at me, with a gentle smile and a natural gesture. Sister, have some more shrimp. Brother's shrimp is the best. It felt like I was just a guest in my own house. Lily was staying with us because Peter thought it was a good idea. 3 days ago, Peter suddenly told me his sister, who had been living abroad, was coming back. He said she'd had a tough time these past few years, alone abroad, betrayed by her boyfriend, and diagnosed with depression. As he spoke, his lips were tight, and his eyes showed a hint of despair. I couldn't help but feel sorry for him. So when he said she was coming back alone, didn't want to go home or tell her parents, and wanted to stay with us for a while, I agreed without hesitation. Back then, I didn't know his so-called sister was actually his crush for so many years. It wasn't until I saw Lily's face at the airport that I realized I'd seen her picture before. On Peter's bookshelf, he had her photo tucked inside a book. She was the moonlight he had cherished in his heart for years. At night, thoughts of Peter and Lily kept me awake. Peter held me from behind, his warm breath tickling my ear. "Can't sleep?" I nodded, then heard a sigh. Stepping out of the room, I found Lily in the living room, tears streaming down her face among the broken ceramic pieces on the floor, trembling slightly. The broken pieces were our ceramic dolls, made by Peter and me at a pottery store. That day, I made his figure, and he made mine. It was only natural for us to get together. I treasured it as a token of our love, even inscribing Peter and Emma together forever on the base of the doll. But now, it was shattered. I frowned at the scattered pieces while Peter was focused on Lily. She looked so beautiful crying, her slightly reddened eyelids pulling at anyone's sympathy. It was just a pair of ceramic dolls. Not a big deal. No need to cry. He sighed softly, then pulled her to sit on the couch, furrowing his brows. "How could you be so careless? Your foot is scratched." "Leave me alone," Lily said, cleaning up the ceramic shards like a maid. She sat on the couch, eyebrows furrowed, tears welling up, looking helpless and pitiful. "Sister, I didn't mean to, I just—" Her hands shook as she tried to speak, but couldn't finish before bursting into tears, as if recalling something deeply sad. Seeing this, I said nothing, and went to the balcony to grab a cigarette. Lily always called me sister. While Peter was cooking in the kitchen, Lily and I sat in the living room. She called me sister and asked about Peter and my life over the years. I corrected her. "I'm married to Peter, so we're family now." Without saying a word, she picked up a cat-shaped pillow from the sofa, smiling at me in amazement. "Sister, look at this. I gave this to Brother Peter before I went abroad. Didn't think it'd still be here." My brows furrowed instantly and my stomach churned. I held the cigarette in my hand but didn't light it. Peter didn't like women who smoked. The type he liked was always like Lily. Black hair, white dress, clean and fragile. Maybe I'd been on the balcony too long as Peter came up to me, took the cigarette from my hand. "Don't smoke, it's bad for you." I wasn't planning to smoke anyway. I was pregnant. Couldn't smoke. He didn't know yet. "What about your sister?" I asked him, gesturing towards the room. "She's asleep in there," I persisted. "Don't you need to keep her company?" "What?" He was taken aback. I chuckled and asked him how long Lily would be staying with us. Looking at him, I made a rare confession. "Peter, I don't like your sister. You know, when I was pursuing you, there was a time you got drunk, hugged me, and kept calling out for Lily. At that time, I didn't know who you were calling, but now, do you really just see her as a sister? Peter, ask her to leave. She leaves, or I will. You choose." Peter looked at me for a long time with a complex expression, then sighed deeply. "Emma, what happened just now? Lily didn't mean it. She just has depression. Her emotions aren't very stable. Can you understand her a bit? I know this request is unfair to you, but Lily's parents, including Lily herself, have been kind to me. Bringing her to our home wasn't for any other reason. The past is in the past. Now I truly see her as just a sister." "I have you, don't I?" Peter made me believe him. I looked at him, remembering so much. We met in high school. Peter was good-looking and a good student, but not very likable because he was too reclusive. He always sat in the back row, leaning against the wall, the darkest spot in the whole classroom. When he sat there, it got even darker, like no light could penetrate. But I liked him a lot. I felt like we were very similar. Peter was transferred to my class in our senior year, a crucial year, and not many students transferred schools, but he did. That year, I never saw his parents. Of course, I never saw mine either. My parents divorced when I was very young, and both of them didn't want me. They fought in court, and the judge granted custody to my father. Shortly after their divorce, they both started new families, and I became the extra one. I suspected Peter's family situation must be similar to mine, or maybe even worse. After all, my father, though he neglected me, wasn't stingy with money. But Peter, even with the heavy workload of senior year, often worked part-time at a milk tea shop outside school. It broke my heart. Besides, I knew Peter was actually a very gentle person. Though he seemed aloof, there was a time I had an argument with my father and was crying alone in the garden behind the school library. He passed by without saying anything, quietly leaving a pack of tissues beside me. I remember it was dusk, with a gentle breeze, the golden sunlight making his hair shimmer. I think that was when I started to like him. Later, I took the same university entrance exam as him. I started pursuing him, doing my best to treat him well. For 4 years in university, Peter rarely went home, even during holidays and breaks. He stayed at school alone. I stuck around him, insisting on celebrating festivals together. I spent Christmas days and birthdays with him, one after another. He liked girls with long hair and white dresses, so I grew out my short hair and wore the dresses he liked. He enjoyed home-cooked meals, saying they tasted like home, so I learned to cook them and served him. I did a lot for him, but as I did more, I realized many things had already been done for him. There were too many traces of another girl in his life, but it didn't matter. I never gave up. If someone had done it, I did it better, even better, until no one could outdo me. No one had treated me well in my life, so I tried my best to treat him right. I chased him for 5 years and finally got what I wanted. But now, that girl has returned. Even if you can guarantee you only see her as a sister, what about Lily? Can you be sure she has no other feelings for you? This time, he stayed silent for a long time. Finally, he said, "No, it's over." Peter assured me that no matter what, he only sees Lily as a younger sister. He said he'd already shown her some apartments and that in a few days, when Lily felt better and found a suitable place, he'd send her away. I still couldn't bear to part with him, with the 8 years between us. I decided to trust him once again, for these 8 years together, and for the child in my belly, who was yet to be born. I subconsciously placed my hand on my belly, then quickly withdrew it. "Peter, it's your own words. Don't lie to me. If you deceive me, I assure you you'll regret it. I will make you regret it." The day Lily moved, it was cloudy. Peter and I went with her to the new house. She had a lot of stuff, and it took nearly 4 hours to clean and pack her luggage. By the time we got back, it was already raining. As soon as we arrived home, Peter got a call from her. I didn't know what was said on the other end. I watched Peter hesitate for a moment before responding. He hung up, walked around her former room, grabbed an umbrella, and rushed out. She'd forgotten something, and I offered to take it to her. It was pouring outside. Should we go now? Her stuff was important and needed right away. I nodded. Then I suggested I go with him. He looked at me, smiled, pulled me into his arms, and kissed my cheek. "Don't worry. I'll be back as soon as I deliver these things." I didn't push further, even though I wanted to go with him. But now I was pregnant and couldn't be so stubborn. I sat on the couch for a long time, poured myself a glass of warm water, letting it cool down slowly, and Peter returned. I only got a message from him. "Emma, the rain is heavy now. I'll stay here for a while and come back when it calms down. When I return, I'll bring you the cake you love the most." I stared at the message for a long time, then replied, "Okay," and stood up. Lily's house door wasn't locked. There was a small gap, letting me see the warm light inside, but I didn't have the guts to push it open. The corridor was dim. Through the door, I could hear sobbing inside. Lily was crying. I could hear it in her voice. "Peter, I miss you so much. In the years I've been abroad, I've thought of you every day and night. Don't you miss me?" My hand on the door handle trembled. "Lily, you're drunk. Let go of me. Stop messing around." Then I heard the sound of a bottle of alcohol hitting the ground. Peter seemed to push her away. "No, I'm not messing around. You were the one who said you liked me first. You wanted to be with me all the time. Do you like me? You must still like me. When you were with her, you found out about my relationship from my dad and got mad because I was with someone else. That's why you agreed to her, right? Answer me." After a long pause, I finally heard his answer, tinged with weariness. "So what if I did? It's all in the past." My heart sank instantly, dropping to the bottom of a valley. I stood there frozen, my body cold, but my heart pounding like it wanted to jump out of my throat. Then all the sounds in the room disappeared, except for a muffled groan. I was very familiar with that groan. Back in the day, I used to love kissing Peter's neck while he read a book, and he'd make that kind of groaning sound. They were kissing. To be precise, Lily was kissing him. But what about Peter? What was his reaction, his expression like? Instinctively, I cracked open the door a little. In the warm light that hit my face, I saw Peter's stunned expression clearly. But in the next instant, he slowly closed his eyes. They were kissing in the warm light. I couldn't hold it anymore, so I covered my mouth and ran away frantically. Maybe hearing the noise, the two inside the room separated. Peter followed me out. Emma, let me explain. Things aren't what you think. Back home, Peter tried to explain over and over, and I locked the bedroom door, feeling dizzy inside. He was outside trying to explain. He said it was all a misunderstanding because Lily was drunk and emotionally unstable. That's why he stayed to accompany her. He said everything was a mistake, all because Lily was drunk. The words he said to her were a misunderstanding. He just didn't want her to keep bothering him. The kiss, too. Finally, he said, Emma, it's all in the past. I have you now. That night, I slept alone. I tossed and turned all night, thinking. The next morning, I got up early, pushed the door open, and saw Peter standing there. He looked like he hadn't slept all night, with dark circles under his eyes and a bit of stubble on his chin, but his expression was cautious. He looked at me like a dog afraid of angering its owner. I thought for a moment, then smiled at him. I'm hungry. I want some porridge you cook. Will you cook porridge for me? Upon hearing me say that, Peter was puzzled for a moment, then quickly smiled. He thought I'd come to my senses and forgiven him. But I hadn't. I had just given up. I thought a lot that night. I've never been someone who only remembers others' faults. On the contrary, maybe life has been too bitter. From childhood to adulthood, I've always remembered the kindness others showed me. So when I think of Peter, I always remember the time when I had a fever, and he stayed by my bedside late at night, holding a damp towel to cool me down. I remember the day he proposed to me on the beach under a starry sky, holding me and kissing me. I remember the anniversary of his parents' passing, when he held me and hoarsely said, Emma, I only have you. Promise me you won't leave me in this lifetime. But I also remember other things. I remember all these days he kept wavering between me and Lily. I remember he forgot what I was allergic to, but remembered all her food preferences. I remember that even though he said he loved me, his eyes were always looking at her. I remember that in these 8 years, I couldn't buy a genuine heart from him. I'm tired. I'm really tired, but I'm also unwilling. I'm unwilling that I've given so much and got nothing in return. I'm unwilling that once I leave, they can live happily ever after. Closing my eyes heavily, I decided that even if I left, Peter couldn't be free to be with Lily. In the days that followed, Peter was really good to me, even considerate. He went out of his way to buy the cakes I liked, grabbed the latest handbags to make amends, and kissed my cheek every morning before leaving. He started going to work on time, spending more time with me. But I also saw on Lily's social media that he was buying her medicine, cooking for her, celebrating her birthday. Her last Instagram post was a pair of photos. One was of her and him years ago, their faces young and full of genuine, warm smiles. The other was a selfie. In the photo, Lily was holding a bouquet of roses, smiling sweetly, and behind her, a man in an apron was busy in the kitchen. The caption read, "Time flies, but we're just like in the past." Anyone who saw those photos and caption would think they were a loving, newlywed couple. I glanced at it, then gave it a like. After a while, I got a call from Peter. "Emma, have you finished work? Let me pick you up for dinner." "Sure. Let's go have some Western food." I happily agreed, though deep down I thought, he's really busy. Busy taking care of me and busy being with her, reluctant to leave me yet unable to let go of her. I pretended to know nothing, playing the role of a good wife who trusted him completely. One evening, I distinctly heard Lily calling him, and I simply asked, "Is that Lily?" At that time, he was lying next to me, half asleep as he answered the call, his mind still groggy. "Yes, she has a cold and a headache." He spoke, then suddenly paused. "Emma, I I smiled and interjected, "Then go and see her. Just remember to come back early." That night, Peter didn't leave. He said they had medicine at her place, and she had taken it and would be fine after a good night's sleep. After his words, he turned to look at me. His expression, how can I describe it? A mix of disbelief and hesitation. He hesitated for a long time, then blurted out, "Why? What? Why?" I acted clueless. "In the middle of the night, you want me to deliver medicine to another woman." So he knew it wasn't right either. I smiled lightly and softly said, "After all, she's your sister, isn't she? Peter, I've thought it over. I should trust you. People have to look forward, right? Let the past be the past." That night, Peter and I had a long conversation. I never liked to act coquettish or vulnerable. I always liked to appear strong. But that night, I mimicked Lily, trying to show vulnerability to him, deliberately amplifying my pain, pretending to be fragile, and then told him, "Peter, I only have you. If I can't even trust you, who can I trust? You promised you'd be good to me for a lifetime. You won't let down my trust, will you?" I knew his temperament. I knew that by doing this, he would pity me and feel guilty. A man's guilt is always more reliable than love, but that alone wasn't enough. Far from it. I slowly placed my hand on my abdomen, feeling a twisted sense of satisfaction in my heart. There was satisfaction, but more so, there was pain. I had longed so much for this child. Both Peter and I loved children. Maybe because of our broken families, we both hoped to have a child of our own bloodline. Not long after we married, we had a misunderstanding. At that time, due to an incorrect pregnancy test method, I thought I was pregnant. When I told him, I could never forget his reaction. He seemed stunned by the huge surprise, dazed for a while before coming to his senses, his eyes shining. He wasn't someone who showed emotions openly, but at that moment, he couldn't hide his smile. He excitedly lifted me up, then carefully put me down, his face filled with regret and worry. He was scared his actions would harm me and the child in my belly. This time, when I found out, I was really pregnant. I was also excited, eager to tell him. But for some reason, that night, I saw his absent-minded look and didn't speak. And now, as I touched my belly, all I thought was, what if Peter knew I was pregnant? If he knew, and if it was him who caused the child's death? Or worse, if the child was lost because of him and Lily, what would he do? I must be going crazy. I felt like those evil antagonists in TV dramas, using a child as a bargaining chip. But I just couldn't help it. He loved children so much. He had longed for a child with me. We even had a name ready for the kid. If that were the case, he wouldn't be able to be with Lily without any guilt, right? In another 10 days, it would be our second wedding anniversary. On that day, Peter took me on a trip to celebrate. I don't know why, but as soon as we reached the destination, I started feeling unwell, even though this child had been so obedient in my womb. Since I got pregnant, there'd never been any discomfort. At night, with my eyes closed, I lay on the bed, unable to sleep no matter what. Peter was lying beside me, fast asleep. The night was deep and silent, amplifying every sound. I heard my cell phone vibrate. It was Lily calling. Again, Peter picked up, said a few words, then hung up. The phone kept vibrating. On the other end, I could hear Lily crying. "Peter, can you come see me? I feel so unwell. I think I'm going to die. Nobody loves me. You don't want me either, do you? I'm standing on the rooftop right now. The wind is so strong. The sky is so dark. Will you come and see me?" Finally, Peter massaged his forehead and sighed softly. I kept lying on the bed, pretending to be asleep, until he nudged me awake. He kissed my cheek. "Emma, there's some trouble at work. I need to go back for a bit. I'll be back tomorrow morning." Normally, I'd nod obediently, playing the gentle and accommodating role I'd been portraying these days, believing everything he said without question. But for some reason, my heart kept pounding. I acted like I had a nightmare and clung to his waist. I even managed to shed a few tears. "Peter, please don't leave. I just had a bad dream. Don't leave me alone here." But Peter still left. He patted my head, asking me to be good and wait for him to return. Little did I know he wouldn't come back. At 2 a.m., an earthquake struck. The house collapsed. I was buried in the rubble. What was it like being buried there? Dark. Endless darkness. The air was limited. The space was confined. Only darkness, which felt infinite. Infinite darkness magnifies all the weaknesses and darkness within a person. I thought I had completely given up on Peter, totally disappointed in him. I thought I was strong, but I wasn't. When I was trapped, unable to move, I realized I was still weak. In the darkness, I texted Peter. Peter, there's been an earthquake. I'm buried underground. It's so dark, I'm so scared. Am I going to die? I don't want to die. In those 4 hours, I sent him many messages, from fear at first, to numbness in the middle, to bitter hate later on. During those 4 hours, I even got messages of comfort from friends, but Peter never replied. I couldn't help but wonder what he was doing during that time. While I was trapped, was he at Lily's house, or maybe in her bed, whispering sweet nothings to her? The thought made me tremble uncontrollably. I was buried for 10 hours. When I was finally rescued, I suddenly had another idea. I sent him 2 final texts, trembling, then threw my phone into the rubble. Peter, I can't hold on anymore. Luckily, you have work to do, or you'd have died here with me and our child. You're really lucky to be safe. It was deliberate. I wanted you to think I died in the rubble. I wanted you to feel guilty, to regret. I wanted you to remember. It was you who suggested, who brought me here. It was you who left me here alone for your Lily, letting me and my child die in a foreign land. Even when I was teetering on the edge of death, my heart and mind were consumed by thoughts of him, constantly worrying and celebrating for him. I wanted him to be haunted by our memories, surrounded by shadows of me. I hoped he'd feel guilty, lying awake at night. By the time Peter got those messages, the sun was already shining bright. The night before, when he discovered Lily, she was up on the rooftop, the wind trying to knock her down. She turned around, glanced at him, and gave a weak smile. Peter, you're back. I knew he still held me in his heart. For some reason, watching that scene, he felt a bit worn out. Mostly it was heartbreak. That evening, Lily clung to him, over and over sharing her grievances. At that moment, he couldn't quite grasp his own emotions. Did he still have feelings for Lily? It seemed not as much. He knew he loved Emma. 8 years together had made her not just his girlfriend, but family too. She was the one who first chased him, who first fell for him. But over those 8 years, he couldn't bring himself to leave her. Towards Lily, he felt only hesitation. He just felt sorry for her. She was his first love from his youth, the one he couldn't forget, the one he couldn't reach. Back then, everyone was against them. Now, he knew he should push her away. But he didn't. He just patted her head, telling her not to overthink things. Did you take your meds today? Any pain anywhere? I'll take you to the doc. He reassured himself it was all good. He was just looking after a patient. His sister, Emma, had no clue. Emma loved him so deeply. Just this once, the last time he woke up in the morning, the sky was already bright. An alarm clock woke him up, and he reached for his phone without thinking, only to see his flight was canceled. Then, a flood of message notifications hit him. Finally, he saw Emma's texts, one after another. She said there had been an earthquake, she was stuck underground, it was pitch dark, and she was terrified. For a moment, he felt like he was plunged into an ice cellar, his hand shaking as he held the phone. He told himself, this can't be real. It's impossible. But the relentless notifications on his phone made it clear it was all happening. He desperately called Emma, but she never answered. He texted her again, still no response. He tried calling again, but no luck. He texted her once more, but nothing came back. Fear started to creep in, sweeping over him like a hurricane. Maybe because he looked so pale, Lily came over and asked, Peter, what's up? Looking at her calm face, he suddenly remembered the night before. Last night, at 2 a.m, while Emma was trapped under the rubble, what was he doing? His face darkened even more. He quickly grabbed his coat from the sofa and headed out. "Peter, where are you going?" He thought he heard Lily's voice, but at the same time he didn't. He just kept walking, his steps shaky. He had no idea where he was headed. Where could he go? All flights to that area were canceled. The roads were destroyed. He couldn't reach her. He couldn't go anywhere. Finally, Peter made his way back home, the place he'd shared with Emma for 3 years. He held his phone numbly, constantly refreshing it, hoping for a message from Emma. But nothing came. He waited for 5 hours and finally got 2 short texts from Emma. "Peter, I can't hold on anymore. It's lucky you're still busy with work. Otherwise, you'd have died here with me and the baby. You're really lucky to be safe." His heart shattered. A baby. He and Emma had a child. Suddenly he remembered a few days ago when Emma took a package full of baby clothes and toys. He was confused. He asked why she bought those. She just smiled and said a friend of hers was pregnant, so she wanted to get her some gifts. Back then, holding her, he had eagerly asked, "Emma, when are we having our own kid?" And she had blushed, smiling shyly. She looked at him seriously and asked, "Peter, if we ever have our own child, will you be a good husband and dad?" "Of course I will. I'll take care of you. I'll do better than anyone else. And I'll never let you down." Memories flooded back instantly. He went on a crazy search for those things, only to find the house filled with Emma's touches. On the fridge was a weekly meal plan Emma had neatly written on a small chalkboard. In the closet, all the clothes were organized, and even in his study, on his desk, were cards she'd written for him. An hour of work done. Time for a break. Don't forget to drink water. Why had he never noticed these things before? Why had he always taken them for granted? He searched for a long time and finally found those items in a drawer. Besides the baby clothes and toys, he also found a very old, thick sketchbook. He knew Emma liked to draw, but he didn't realize she had secretly sketched so many portraits of him. One by one, from their first meeting in high school, getting to know each other, falling in love, and getting married, she had captured every moment with her drawings. The earliest sketch was very old, showing him reading a book in high school. She had written beside it, "The person I fell in love with at first sight." The second drawing showed the start of their relationship. He was discreetly handing tissues to a girl crying in the garden. She wrote, "He's really a gentle person." The third drawing confused him for a bit because he couldn't remember looking like that. Only after reading the note did he realize it must have been from their first Chinese New Year together. She wrote, "Turns out he, like me, has nowhere to go. I feel so sorry for him. From now on, I'll spend every Christmas with him. Even if he doesn't need my company, having someone by your side is always better, right?" He kept flipping through the pages and finally found the portrait of them together. There were no people in the drawing, just 2 well-crafted ceramic dolls. She wrote beside it, "Our token of love. Even though you never told me you liked me, we made ceramic dolls for each other, and you'd smile looking at them. This should be a form of mutual understanding, right? I'll keep these dolls safe. When we marry, have kids, and when we're old, I'll show these to our grandkids and tell them our story." As he read this, he took a sharp breath and subconsciously went to the living room to find those ceramic dolls. But when he reached the display cabinet, he suddenly remembered that the pair of ceramic dolls had already been broken. His hand grasped at nothing. Eventually, he collapsed on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. After the earthquake, that place was closed for 7 days. During those days, Peter did everything he could. He sent her countless messages and made numerous calls. He even reported her missing to the police, searched for everyone connected to her, but never found any info. He even went to her parents, but they had no clue what happened on their end. He couldn't accept that Emma was dead. Every night, he locked himself in his room. He didn't dare go anywhere, as every corner of the house was filled with traces of Emma. He thought of her when he saw the paintings on the walls, the decorations on the table, the warm yellow cushions on the sofa, and the flowers by the bedside. So many memories between them. She loved him deeply, and he loved her too. But why did things end up like this? On the 6th night, the flowers by the bedside were left and started to wilt. He was the same. He lay in bed, flipping through the photo album she left behind and the messages she sent while buried underground. He wondered, what was she feeling down there? She loved him so much. Her love was always intense and passionate, but he had betrayed her. leaving her all alone. Being buried underground alone, she must have felt hopeless and scared, right? Yet she told him, "It's good that you're okay." He closed his eyes tightly, his hand slowly moving toward his neck. It must have been so dark down there. Dark, gloomy, no light, limited air. What would it feel like to not breathe? His hand pressed harder. Would it feel like this? He opened his mouth like a fish gasping for air, but his hand didn't let go. Then he released the pressure. He couldn't die. He had to find her. Even in death, he needed to be with her in the same place. The next time I saw Peter was on the 7th day after the earthquake. On the 7th day post-earthquake, the roads were finally cleared and flights resumed. I hid in the tent, watching him holding my photo, searching for me everywhere. He'd already asked the person in charge here, but there was no news about me there. How could there be? I just didn't want him to find me. After being rescued, I lied about not having my phone or ID. When they were gathering info, I gave my friend's name and ID number. I didn't know how long I could stay hidden, but for now, I would hide as long as I could. I took one last look at his frantic figure and slowly got into my friend's car. He looked worn out, with stubble and uncut hair. But what did that have to do with me? He deserved all this. I stayed at my friend Sophia's house for a week and finally went out. I went to the hospital to have an abortion. When Peter found me, I had already had the procedure and was lying on the hospital bed. He looked at me, his eyes suddenly red and puffy. I didn't say anything and silently took out the divorce papers I had prepared. "Let's get a divorce." Peter refused, Emma. I didn't say anything and silently handed him the divorce agreement. "Let's get a divorce." Peter wouldn't sign. I asked him just one question. "Peter, what were you doing on the night of the earthquake at 2:30 a.m. when I was buried under the rubble? I know everything. Sign it. You don't deserve my true feelings at all." He was stunned for a moment, his face as pale as paper, but he still refused to sign. Maybe he realized that between us, the feelings had faded, and there was no child anymore. This thin, flimsy piece of paper, with our names on the marriage certificate, was our final connection. He forced a grin, but his body was trembling. "Emma, let's go home. You just had the operation. Let me take care of you." Sophia pushed him away. Sophia was my friend who came to pick me up after the earthquake, and I had been staying at her place these days. "Do you have any shame? Emma has made it so clear. Don't you know what you've done? How dare you talk about taking care of me?" "Well, I don't need you to take care of me. I will take good care of Emma." He asked again how he could be forgiven. "Emma, I know I was wrong. I will change. Will you forgive me? Will you give me another chance?" "Another chance? I've already given you one. I asked you. I believed in you. But what about you?" He couldn't say a word. He pulled out the album. Veins bulged on his hands as he clenched the album. After hesitating for a moment, he finally blurted out, But Emma, you love me, right? No one will ever love you like she did." After hesitating for a bit, he finally said, But Emma, you love me, right? No one will ever love you like she did. If you love me so much, how could you suddenly stop loving me?" He actually asked that. I looked at him intensely, with no emotions left in my heart. I smiled lightly, grabbed the album from him, and tore it into pieces. "Peter, I loved you, but that was in the past. I loved you, but who wouldn't be better to love than you? Every stroke and line in this book is my true feelings, but you don't deserve to keep them." In the days that followed, Peter came to see me every day. Each time he brought the soup he made, then knocked on Sophia's door. And Sophia, every time in front of him, poured the soup down the trash can and then sent him away. A week later, Sophia had enough. She called the police to drive Peter away. So after that, Peter waited for me at the community gate every day. He waited for over half a month. During those 2 weeks, he quit his job and even gave up on Lily. I never went downstairs to see him. On the day 2 weeks later, it was my birthday. That day, Peter bought a cake, called me, hoping I'd come see him. On the phone, he said he'd wait for me until I came. I didn't say anything and hung up. I still didn't go to see him. That night, it was pouring rain. Early the next morning, I got a call from Lily. She told me Peter had a high fever and was in the hospital. She begged me to come see him. I still didn't say anything and hung up, but I still went to the hospital. The smell of disinfectant was strong. Peter saw me, and his eyes lit up immediately. I looked at him, then at the equally haggard Lily beside him, and slapped them both. "What are you doing?" Lily spoke up, about to push me, but I shoved her to the ground first. I gave her another slap, splashing the water on the table onto her face. I stared at her steadily, one word at a time. "What? Shouldn't you be hit? You should be grateful I'm not arguing with you now, or I'd have exposed your shit a long time ago. Don't you have depression? Can't you live without your Peter? Now, your Peter doesn't want you. Why haven't you died yet? Or is your diagnosis report totally fake?" She was hit by my words, turned pale, and didn't dare speak. I was too tired to look at her again. While we argued, Peter just watched me quietly the whole time. It was like he totally ignored that I had slapped Lily. He didn't say a word, and when I turned to look at him, he carefully tugged on my sleeve, his eyes red and hopeful. "Emma." I pulled my sleeve out silently, frowned, and said slowly, "Peter, you really disgust me like this." He stammered, I just feel guilty. I want to make it up to you." I laughed out loud and threw the divorce papers in front of him again. "Want to make it up to me? You're just being self-pitying. I've said it before, in this life or the next. I don't want to see you again, understand? No matter what you do, I can never forgive you. Even if you're lying in the hospital dying now, I just feel disgusted. If you really feel guilty, then sign the papers." The light in his eyes finally went out. In the end, Peter signed the divorce papers. I also moved out of Sophia's house. I changed cities, moved into a new home, and started fresh. For the next few years, I didn't see Peter again. However, every Christmas, I'd receive some weird packages filled with jewelry and luxury items. I sent them all back. One time, I got a pair of ceramic dolls that looked almost exactly like the ones Lily had smashed before. I smashed those dolls and sent them back too. 3 years after the divorce, my career took off, and I met someone new. We met at work. Soon after getting to know each other, we hit it off and started dating naturally. He was super gentle, totally different from Peter. No messy ex-girlfriends. Since we started dating, he often talked about me. People around him knew he was henpecked. He rarely drank and kept a distance from female friends on purpose. Even at social events, he'd come home on time because his girlfriend kept him on a short leash. He said, "Emma, I'm your boyfriend. I need to control myself and give you a sense of security. Let's keep our relationship natural and get married." Shortly after we got married, I heard Peter wasn't doing well. After the divorce, he was really depressed, numbing himself with alcohol every day, and had been to the hospital several times. On the day I got married, he drank until he had stomach bleeding. That white moonlight of his was always by his side, but unfortunately, Peter didn't want her company. I heard he seemed genuinely depressed now. A few days later, I got a letter. There was no signature, but as soon as I saw the handwriting, I knew it was from Peter. I didn't open it, just tore it up and threw it in the trash. After so many years, I had moved on to a new life and didn't want to hear anything else from him.